Hey guys, welcome back. I have a new fun gadget in the kitchen. I have been looking for a hand cranked pasta maker. Of course, I have the one in my previous videos where I do my lasagna sheets and I can do like fettuccine noodles and stuff like that, which is all great. But I like spaghetti noodles, I like elbow noodles, I like just about every type of noodle out there. So I ended up ordering this little cheapo kit in the interim, and I'll put a link below off Amazon. I think I got it one of the Prime deals. It was like 40 some dollars because I really wanted to make as many of my noodles from scratch as possible because I don't like enriched foods, because enriched foods mean that we took all the good stuff out for you and put a bunch of stuff back in that you don't need. So I like to use, organic wheats and all these types of things into my pasta, and you will find that when you start to substitute out, and there are some brands out there that are really good, like if you want to do the pastas from like Azure Standard and all that, they have a really good flavor to them. So if you don't have the time to make your own pasta, that's a really good place to get a nice organic, drum pasta from. But if you have the time and you want to make these things yourself, then I think this little kit is kind of nifty. So, like I said, I'll put the link below for the one I bought. I get absolutely nothing from it except the pleasure of you guys making your own pastas. So this is a very basic recipe for pasta noodles. You can actually use it for just about any pasta noodle you want. I will also put a link for the flour that I use as well with this because I get my flour imported in because I don't grain my own mills. I don't mill my own grains. Apparently need more coffee. So since I don't have the time to do that, I have in the past, but right now with everything going on, just adding milling on top of everything, it's kind of hard. But if I know I'm going to be large batch processing these, I order a couple bags and I'm able to get quite a few batches of pasta out of it. And it's not ridiculously expensive either. So I'll put that link below as well. So we're just starting with 2 cups of the flour in the bowl, and we're going to add a half teaspoon of salt. Now, like I said, as always, I'm going to put the recipe below, and I'm also going to put a gluten-free recipe below for my gluten intolerant friends. I think this would be really beneficial for you guys because y'all's pasta is ridiculously expensive to try to buy something gluten-free. So we're going to add 2 tablespoons of water. Make sure it's not chlorinated water. And then we're going to add 3 tablespoons of olive oil. Make sure you're using a decent olive oil. And if your eggs are normal sized, you're going to want to use 2 normal sized eggs, but these are pullet eggs, so they're a little bit on the smaller side. So I'm going with 3 just to make sure I have enough egg in there because, like I said, they are kind of small, but they're farm fresh, so that's the way to go. So we're going to put all of this in here, and then we're just going to start to, I've made a well in the bowl with the flour, and we're just going to start to kind of mix this all together. At some point, we're going to have to get our hands dirty. Once we get it all mixed together, we're going to knead the dough for about anywhere from 6 to 10 minutes until it gets an elastic texture to it. It almost looks like Play-Doh. Is a good example in my brain for those of us that played with a lot of Play-Doh. So once you get it kind of to that crumbly texture in the bowl, then what you're going to do is you're going to have to, you could do this in the mixer if you wanted to, but I prefer hand kneading. While I have the availability with my hands to be able to do things, I prefer to do it that way. We're just, like I said, we're just going to take it and start to work in our ingredients together until we get that elasticity. Now, as you're doing this, if you find that it's maybe a little bit on the dry side, sometimes even with the best of intentions, it doesn't turn out how we want it to. So if it's a little on the dry side, I would start by adding, like a teaspoon of water until you get the consistency that, allows you to pick up everything in the bowl. And what we're doing with this kneading process, because we're going to let it sit for about a half hour after we fully knead it, but this is kind of where your dough becomes nice and flavorful. And press all the air out, and then we're going to let this sit for a half hour. And once this has completed, then we will come back and we'll start making our pasta. Okay, so this has now rested for 30 minutes. So we're just going to take it out of the bag. And then what I end up doing is I quarter it. And then when you quarter it, you're going to take a fourth of it and run it through your machine. But the rest of it you're going to take and put back in the bag. And you want to get in the habit of just putting these back in the bag, because if you're working with, like, if you're doing your sheets of pasta and stuff like that take a little bit longer to process, you don't want your dough just sitting over here and drying out on the counter, because then it'll crumble, because it is kind of fast drying. Now, for this one, I end up just kind of rolling it down. You can do little balls if you want to and drop those in, whatever your preference is, but I find this seems to work just fine. Honestly, for the amount of money I paid for it, being as cheap as it is, I'm actually quite impressed. It comes apart very easy. It breaks down into 3 different parts, which I'll show you at the end of it. And then that way you can really get in there and clean it all. If you have one of the meat grinders that goes to this, it's a pain to sometimes break down. But then it has this little tool on it where you can actually cut stuff, which is kind of nice too. So that way you're not sitting here with, scissors trying to gauge your noodles. If you get a little distracted while making these, sometimes I do, then you'll just end up with really long noodles, and you can just kind of chop them back down. So it's a good habit too, that if you have to step away for any reason, that you turn your machine off, or you're just going to end up with noodles, unless you're making spaghetti, and then that'll work. So I found with this one, you don't really have to put a lot of force to it, but you're going to want to try to start this at about a 2 on your speed. You go any faster, they're going to come out too fast. You go any slower, you're going to get bored waiting for it. So what we're going to do is we're just going to kind of sit here until it gets started. And that cutter's kind of nice. Now, as these start to layer up in the pot, what I'm going to do is I'm actually going to take a little flour and sprinkle over them to keep them from sticking together during this process, because we don't want to make all these noodles and then end up with a big ball of dough at the end. But for the most part, they hold quite well without having to really monitor that situation. But if you're making large batches of them, you are going to want to dust in between before putting them on your drying racks. Now, what I do when I'm going to dry them, and I'm not putting a lot of force on this, I'm just kind of holding it there so it doesn't bubble it back up. But I actually get out my dehydrator and I just put it on the racks, and I just let it sit in there and dry. That way I don't have to worry about bugs, critters, whatever getting into it. Probably a little OCD about flies. We all have our problems, that's mine. But, so we're just going to sit here and just keep working through these. I think this is kind of a fun project. If you have littles, they'll kind of have fun, making the noodles into different shapes. And like I said, I really want to get one that's kind of hand cranked, although I could probably MacGyver this thing into a hand crank if it, the world ended tomorrow. I've got enough random cranks around here between laundry devices and everything else. I'm sure I could find something that could fit. I was actually looking at the bolt. You could probably get something your drill could attach to too. But if you're solar, these don't take a lot to run anyway. So you'd still be okay. It's quite a simple enjoyment in watching this process. So if you make your own homemade pastas and stuff, I actually found this one's kind of nice too. If you take these noodles, now if you're going to cook them immediately, they don't take as long to cook, but if you're going to dry them, they're going to take anywhere from 8 to 10 minutes. If you cook them freshly made, so let's say you just want to put them together for tonight, they take somewhere around 3 to 4 minutes, but always just kind of test them to depend on how your water is boiling. Everybody's stove cooks different. Mine takes forever to boil. I don't know why. I've replaced the eyes twice. But I find this one's kind of nice if you take them and you make them fresh, and then you put them in a pan with some garden tomatoes and garlic and basil and all of that, and just kind of cook it together until it cooks down. It's kind of nice and refreshing too. So I'm going to keep working through these until we get them done. I've actually done a double batch today, so that's overall 4 cups. So you'll see how much 4 cups of flour ultimately end up yielding you in the end, should you decide you want to do this. And like I said, you can make these fresh, you know, and cook them for dinner. I mean, really, from start to finish, you're talking maybe an hour. I don't know about you, but I can spend an hour just easily in the kitchen making dinner some nights. So it just depends. Or if you're like, hey, you know, Sunday I want to do big batch prep and put a whole bunch on your shelves, and then that way when you want to do easy dinner, you know everything that's in it. And if you're gluten-free, then you know everything that's in it specifically, and you know that you're not going to have any issues as well. So let me get these made up, and as soon as I've completed the batch, I'll come back, I'll break this down, I'll have them drying. I've already got one batch kind of that's been sitting over there for a couple hours already drying. So we'll come back and we'll look at those and see how they're drying up. So we'll be back. Okay, so I have made my noodles. And like I said, I'm just going to lay these off, and I'm gonna set them in my dehydrator. I mean, you could run them through your dehydrator if you want to. Just depends on how you want to process them. I find they dry quite nicely without running them through and actually turning the dehydrator on. But the reason that I put them in there is, you know, again, so we have a nice clean space that I don't have to worry about bugs and flies and all sorts of things landing on my pasta while I'm trying to let it dry, because I will throw it away. So I'm gonna get all this on here, and we're gonna go set that in so we can start these up. These other ones have been in there quite a while. I've been doing this for a little bit this morning already. Pretty much down my cup of coffee and got started because I have a lot I have to get done today. So, but I wanted to get this out here for you guys because I think it's quite entertaining. Let me put those in and I'll be right back. Now, if you are going to run them through your dehydrator, it's recommended that you go 2 to 4 hours at 135 degrees. If you're going to just let them sit in there, They can usually dry up in about a day, just depending on how humid your house is, how hot your house is. Like I said, this comes apart quite easily. You're going to take your cutting tool off first. Be careful. Like, while this isn't really, really sharp, it's just a very thin wire, especially if you have small ones around. And then while it's connected, you're going to take this off here. Again, it really sets up just like your meat grinder. And then it has these little inserts in them, so you can change those out for different types of pasta. So I know there's spaghetti, rigatoni, of course elbow noodles. There's quite a few of them on there that I found quite nice. And then you're just going to detach this from your KitchenAid, pop that little button there to unlock it, and then you should be able to now push your wheel out, and then you'll be able to take this completely down. So if you're changing between pasta types, you're able to really get in there and clean it out. And for the most part, it really doesn't leave that much behind. So I'm going to get this cleaned up, clean up my work area, do dishes probably for the 8th time today. I'm going to let those dry, and then once they have dried to a point that I can show you how they've set up, I'll come back. Like I said, those have been in there a couple hours because I got derailed doing something else. So let me get this all cleaned up, and then I'll come back and I'll show you the final product. Hey guys, so I actually ended up running to town and getting my errands done before the weekend. And so these have dried, and you'll be able to tell because you won't be able to squish them anymore. They'll be, just as hard as they would be had you bought them in the store. And then from there, all I do is I just put them into my mason jar, and then we'll cap them off. And you want to make sure you get as much moisture out. So if you make them and you want to let them sit for a while, or like I said, turn on your dehydrator to make sure you get all the moisture out, then that'll work nicely. But all we'll do is cap them. So each sheet is going to fill up the jar about halfway. So you're going to end up getting quite a bit of macaroni noodles out of the 4-cup recipe, or the 2-cup recipe that I put below. So this is like half of the batch right here. And I'm just going to do like the recipe below is just going to be the 2 cups. And then of course, if you want a double, triple batch, whatever you want to do, right, you can go from there. But to me, I think this is a nice, easy way to have pasta sitting on our shelves that we know all the ingredients to. If you're gluten intolerant, you know that you've made a gluten-free pasta. You don't have to worry about cross-contamination or anything like that. That could possibly cause issues if you have something maybe as severe as like celiac disease or anything like that. So I'm going to put the recipe that I made down there. I'm going to put the gluten-free one that I found down there for you guys as well. Also, the link for the little gadget that I have that I found that goes with the KitchenAid. There's a couple of them on there if you don't have a KitchenAid. There are some different, once you pull up that whole genre in Amazon, right, you'll get a whole different world of fun gadgets to kind of play with. Don't get lost in the weeds. I sometimes do. But yeah, so I think this is pretty nice, pretty nifty that you know everything that's in there, and you get away from those enriched foods, which again, enriched means we took everything out that was good for you and beneficial, and we put back a whole bunch of junk that's probably going to kill you. So I appreciate you guys watching this. I'm glad you stopped by, and I hope to see you next time.